I traveled probably the furthest away from my home at this point, and it was around dusk, and my family had just caught hundreds of sea urchins. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get my camera. So I step out of this kind of like this hut, and my ankle rolled. As I'm falling, my camera falls right into the barrel, which is a bucket of fresh water. They all come in, and they're, making sure my bones aren't broken. I'm more terrified about my camera because I've come all this way, and I've just dropped it in a bucket of water.
If this is your first time with us, I want to welcome you. This is episode 002 of Doc This, your number one place to hone your skills. On this episode, we talk with Taylor Mcnulty. Taylor has worked in the industry in some of the biggest films in Hollywood, to include Dark Knight Rises with Christopher Nolan, Inside Llewyn Davis with the Coen brothers. But this isn't what drives her. Recently, she traveled to Bali to work on a remote village 6 hours away from the nearest town. She talks about that experience, what it was like leaving Hollywood behind to do it, and how she dealt with dropping her camera in a bucket of water. Tell me a little bit maybe about you, where you're at, and kind of what you're doing right now. I definitely think that's interesting to hear more about that.
So I moved to New York about 4 or 5 years ago, and I started working on film sets, and I became a PA, and it was kind of this crazy opportunity in New York when the tax incentives were actually higher here than Los Angeles. So a lot of things were coming here. I jumped on The Dark Knight Rises with Christopher Nolan. I got to work with the Coen brothers on Inside Llewyn Davis, and got to see and Darren Aronofsky's Noah. I've blocked that out of my mind because it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And you get to see these directors you look up to and these people that you're studying in film school. And some of the times you learn they're not as great, or you learn their human flaws, or you get to see the other side, and you're kind of, your hero falls from its pedestals. And then other times they impress you. You're like, wow, they're really talented and really good at what they're doing. But then at some point I got really frustrated, and I had just this itch and this desire to make things. And when you're just constantly making other people's things, even if they're the people you look up to, that itch wasn't going away. And it was just really frustrating. And I kind of just hit a wall, and it was my whole being. I just was that's not what I want to be doing. And my friend who had told me about this village on the ocean about 3 years ago, it was around the same time, and I was interviewing to be an assistant to an actress. And my friend was like, do you want to live her stories, or do you want to live your own stories? I got off the phone with this interview, and the person was in Europe, and I got a call. My phone rang, and I thought it was the person calling again. It was an unknown number. And it turns out it was my friend in Indonesia who had been telling me about this village for about 3 years. And it was 4 a.m. in Indonesia. And he called, and he's like, you have to come. I'm coming back one more time, and you have to come. And going to Indonesia made a lot more sense than continuing to work on a job that wasn't fulfilling what I wanted to do, even though it was kind of one of those situations where you're around the thing you want to do. So everyone thinks oh, that's great, you're doing it, but you're not.
What kind of drove the topic? Was there any history behind the choice? What kind of brought that about?
So I'm from Florida. I grew up near the ocean. I remember I would spend summers at the beach, and there were days where there'd be thousands of stingrays just breeding right in the waves, and it was the craziest day. But as time went on, these sort of days became less and less. And when my friend had initially told me about these group of people that live on top of the water, I was just I want to know how they see the ocean. And I want to know what they think is happening to the ocean. And I want to know what we can do to help stop this current state. And I almost saw them as, I don't know, having a deeper layer than I would with what's happening. That's what drew me to it. It was kind of this idea that the ocean could talk. And if the ocean could talk, these are the people who could interpret its voice.
How long did you live over there? And can you talk about some of the physical challenges?
Yeah. So I was over there for 3 months. For the first month, I was kind of studying the language. The next month, month, it was kind of the journey to get to the Bao Jiao and then to live with the Bao Jiao. And then the following month was just kind of like decompressing from it all and enjoying Bali for a moment. So, and like going through what you've been working on and trying to piece together how this is all going to come together. Like, what's your story? It's a bit surreal, like thinking about it or seeing the film now, because at first, when you're living there and right after I'd like left, it seemed so natural and normal. And then giving yourself like 6 months and finally looking at the footage, I was like, whoa, this is actually not something you see every day. It was my everyday for a little while, so I was used to it, but it kind of, the time actually helped looking back and editing it, so you can see how to piece it all together, because you realized, oh, this is kind of unique.
Do you feel like it's more challenging as a woman to kind of take on a role like this and kind of go out there and do what you did?
Yeah, actually, it was interesting. I think I really wanted to talk to the women and have the women open up, but the women were in some ways more reserved with me. And I think it potentially was a cultural thing. They might not be used to being in the spotlight or being the center of the attention or being the one who wanted their voice heard, but that's exactly why I wanted their voice heard. But when I would talk to the women, it was like I was hitting a wall and I didn't know how to get past it. And I think there was a lot. I had a short amount of time and I had a subject who was very articulate and almost poetic. He and I really connected, so I focused on him, but the times I would try to talk to the women, it was almost more difficult, and it made me sad because I was like, I really want to tell your story too, but I don't know if you're used to having someone tell your story.
When you kind of do something like this and you go out and you have kind of a story in mind, and then you interview and then you come back and you're looking at the footage and you're cutting it and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to show this to people. What kind of fears come up? And can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, there's definitely as a documentary filmmaker, I want to be a voice of truth, and I don't want to give them a voice or make them say something that they wouldn't say. And I don't want to be putting words necessarily in their mouth. But that's like a tricky thing when you're like trying to tell a story or have something in mind. But I feel like, I had a translator there. I would talk to them. I wanted their voice to come true. But there is a fear that, going in when you're interviewing someone else, especially in a different culture or in a different language, I don't want to misrepresent them.
The story of the camera.
Yeah.
That was on this trip?
That was on this trip.
Tell me this story. I'm curious to hear it.
Well, first of all, I packed pretty light. I brought a DSLR and a GoPro. I put everything in this Target bag that had a Batman symbol on it because my laptop and camera and everything fit in this. So I was pretty inconspicuous. I traveled probably the furthest away from my home at this point. And I was probably 3 days from the closest Canon store, which would have been in Jakarta. But I'm 2 days or 6 hours from civilization. And in their community, they have electricity for a few hours at night. And it was around dusk. And my family had just caught hundreds of sea urchins. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get my camera. So I step out of this kind of like this hut and my ankle rolled. And as my ankle rolled, I ended up falling on my back about 5 feet. But as I was falling, there's this giant barrel, and I'm trying to grab the barrel to keep myself up. And the barrel, as I'm falling, my camera falls right into the barrel, which is a bucket of fresh water. I pull the barrel onto me. And so then I'm just soaked with water. They all come in, and some people have oil. They're rubbing me. They're making sure my bones aren't broken. I'm more terrified about my camera because I've come all this way and I've just dropped it in a bucket of water. And it was, luckily we were in a country that loves rice. So we just buried the camera. We just took every opening out. We filled it with rice. And we let it sit. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like 3 days of not shooting, but what's really my alternative? So, and it was funny because it was like around Easter time. And so I'm like, all right, here it goes. It's in this bucket of rice for 3 days. And on the third day, I opened it up and I turned it on and it worked.
I feel like it's times like more times like that define a project.
Right.
Or your resolve, or just maybe, kind of answers some questions for you more than a lot of things.
Right. I'm
curious now, you kind of left the industry. Are you back doing the industry now? Or are you back kind of?
Yeah, I am back in the industry right now. All I know is like, I don't know what the piece of this puzzle will be, but I know it's a piece of the puzzle that I had to do. And I don't know how long I have to do it for, but I'm like, it's funny. I'm getting in the middle of Hollywood, but in myself, I'm more of like an independent filmmaker who knows how you can do things cheaper without as many people. But you also see the value of that when you're working on like a big crew. But when I do my own projects, I'm like, but you can do this for a lot less,
Is there something that like you can kind of look at and feel like you've come away with from this?
It was interesting you talking about fears. In some ways, I think that's what maybe filmmaking is, this extreme sport of facing your fears and making things happen in spite of fears. But along the process, it's terrifying. But I feel like, I don't know what human emotion is, where when we win, we love winning, but when we lose, we like feel that more. You're like, oh, I really remember that time I lost. But it's like when you finish a film, you love finishing the film, like, and there's this moment of like this just high or something, and you're just like, wow, that was great. But then the process of making it and all of those feelings along the way are so much more intense than that one moment of like relief and release. You're like, that was great. That's why we do it. Here we go. I don't know. As a filmmaker, you try to walk away from and you can't. You get right back in the arena with another something that comes up.
Guys, if this is your first episode with us, thank you so much for joining us. I want you to join, like, follow, tweet, retweet, connect. Who doesn't? Everyone wants a little love out there, but I'm trying to grow a specific part of the community, documentary filmmakers. So join us, follow us, help us grow, help us help each other out in the process.